Hello, I'm Philip Luck, Scholl Chair in International Business and Economics Program Director here at CSIS. Today we're going to be talking about one of the most important economic security levers the United States has, which is immigration policy. In the United States, immigration policy has been an important driver of economic security for basically our entire existence. There has been no country that has grown as consistently or as fast as the United States over 2 centuries, and that is due almost to an enormous degree to immigration policy. Now, that strength, in some sense, does have a risk of eroding. As you can see here on this graph, we have a graph of working age population growth rate from the late 1980s through 2023. And as you can see, the growth in the US population, especially for working age folks, has been declining, especially since around 2000. There's been a little bit of a spike in the last few years, and it continues a bit after that as well. But that spike is entirely due to increases in immigration. And to the degree to which we restrict the flow of immigrants, we are going to restrict the growth of the US economy and the US labor force. And one very important tool for growing the US economy has been, especially in high-skilled occupations, the H-1B program. So Thibault, if you wouldn't mind, tell us a little bit about this program and the importance of it for the US economy.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Phil. So the H-1B program is a critical pathway for US high-skilled immigration, right? It prioritizes foreign workers with specialty skills in advanced occupations, right? So on the left-hand side, it's sort of this green line here, we see the H-1B lottery success rate, right? Actually, how many immigrants get an H-1B visa after applying for lottery. In 2014, just not that long ago, that number was around 70%, right? And then it steadily declined all the way to 2024, the latest numbers, to under 20%. The H-1B program over the last decade has become an increasingly oversubscribed program. Now, on the right-hand side, we see the number of non-working age people per 100 working age adults, right? What we call the age dependency ratio. That number has been going up. As in 2014, there was about 49 non-working age people per 100 working age adults, aged between 20 to 65. Now that number is over 54, and that has pretty severe consequences for the US economy because it puts more and more pressure on the US workforce.
Yeah, so that's a really important point. So not only is the growth rate of the working age population declining, because we have such a large population that is older, the baby boomers and others, the number of workers that are able to support every retiree has been declining. That means there's more pressure on all of us to support Social Security, Medicare, and other programs that support the elderly. And so we can only really support those through kind of 2 mechanisms. One, extreme population growth. The other is a big productivity growth that makes us have more income now to pay for those. So again, thinking about this program, one really important point here is the fact that the H-1B program, there's a lot of demand for those visas and the supply is not keeping up. So if we think about that program, a lot of times people think about tech service jobs, right? But that's not the only thing there. So what else do we have as sort of occupations and industries that are fed and sort of powered by this program?
Right, so the H-1B program is dominated by professional, scientific, and technical services, but one of the reasons why it's a bit of a problem that we saw an oversubscription that doesn't meet US workforce needs is because the H-1B recipients can support a lot of other sectors that are critical to American life, right? The H-1B recipients are critical to supporting the manufacturing sector, they're critical to supporting the educational services and healthcare services sectors, all very important to the US economy. One good way of sort of fixing this oversubscription issue would be to expand capacity of the H-1B program, sort of raise the cap from 65,000 plus 20,000 masters and PhD to higher numbers to make sure that they could actually sufficiently support all of these very important sectors, right? Let's take a quick look at one sector that's especially critical to both the US economy as well as US strategic interests, right? The semiconductor sector. Next slide, please. The US semiconductor industry is set to grow and add more positions in the next 5 years or so, right? The US semiconductor sector is both economically important and strategically important. Economically, it supports around 1 million jobs and adds $250 billion annually to the US GDP. Strategically, obviously semiconductors power anything that has an on and off switch, basically, including technologies with military applications. So what are we seeing on this graph, right? What we're seeing is that the supply of workers in 2030 is barely going to be able to replace workers that are getting out of the workforce, and they're certainly not going to be able to fulfill the additional jobs that are going to result from the US semiconductor industry growing, right? So across technicians, engineers, computer scientists, we're going to be missing tens of thousands of workers within the next 5 years.
Yeah, so that's really important. Again, those dark blue is sort of those who are needed for, or that's the workers available for replacement or need to be replaced, and the green is sort of the projected supply. So just that does not sort of affect, that's just status quo. That's sort of like equilibrium. We need to add more on top of that, which we don't have the ability to do currently.
Right, absolutely. And so one good way to fix this issue that's relevant to the H-1B program, right, in addition to adding more capacity for the program, generally speaking, is to emphasize what we would call strategic sectors, right? Sectors that are particularly, again, important to the US economy and its strategic interests. So right now we're looking at semiconductors, but as we've previously mentioned, there's a lot of other sectors that are relevant to this issue, right? The H-1B sector could be, the H-1B program could be weighted in a way that prioritizes, again, manufacturing, educational services, healthcare services, and others. A good way to do that would be to place additional weight on these applications during the lottery process.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's a lottery, because it's oversubscribed, we can sort of choose how we weight those lottery options to support things. Everything from, semiconductor manufacturing all the way to shipbuilding, which is a big priority of this administration as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so it's another really important point here about this. I think even though we sort of can say that there's this excess of demand for labor, there's still a sort of popular refrain that these types of programs and these types of visas take jobs away from Americans, high-skilled jobs at that. But what the data shows is really not that at all. It shows quite the opposite. So we have one really good experiment of a reduction in this program in the past. So in 2004, the cap on H-1B visas went down by 40%. And as a result of that, if you would have potentially have seen an increase in employment of sort of more high-skilled workers in the United States. But we saw something that's much more interesting and sort of cuts against that as sort of a strategic advantage, because what we did see was those big firms that sort of continue to hire domestic workers, instead of hiring more domestic workers, they actually increased their demand of foreign workers. They did offshoring. So the way you can see this in this graph, this is what's called sort of an event study. In 2004, we saw a 40% reduction in the cap on H-1B program. What we have here in two different lines, in the light blue line, we have the foreign hiring of firms that are not especially dependent on the H-1B program. So they are not really affected by that reduction by 40%. In dark blue, we have the number of foreign employees of US firms that were dependent on the H-1B program. And what we see there is a really sizable increase in their demand for foreign workers in the exact same occupations that they used to use the H-1B program to fill. So what we see from that, and this research by Britta Glennon, who's an economist at Penn, also an affiliate of the economics program here at CSIS, this research shows that for every visa that's restricted, these big multinationals will hire roughly between a half and one additional foreign worker in these high-skill occupations. So not only are we not incentivizing these work to be done here in the United States, we're incentivizing it to be done in other jurisdictions, which may or may not be aligned with the United States, and therefore create an economic security challenge for the United States as well.
And Phil, that number is particularly important given what the administration has been doing with the H-1B program recently, right?
Yeah, so what have they been doing recently?
So last September, the administration imposed a $100,000 fee on H-1B applications coming from outside the United States. So, if you're an international student that's going from an F1 to an H-1B already in the US, that doesn't concern you. But for really the majority of H-1B applications coming from the outside, you are now facing an administrative fee of $100,000. That's a staggering increase in administrative costs. And that is a de facto restriction, such as the one that Britta Glennon showed in her study here, that's bound to be offshoring jobs rather than giving more jobs to American workers.
Yeah, exactly. So again, these fees were, historically around like $4,000 or $5,000, really small numbers. Now $100,000. So we can really think about those restrictions, that being a restriction, very similar to what was been studied in the past. So this is in real terms an incentive to offshore these strategic important occupations. So overall, we think that immigration is a key foreign policy and industrial policy tool of the United States. It has been a key driver of economic growth in the United States for multiple centuries at this point. And we think with relatively small strategic tweaks to the immigration program, specifically the H-1B program, the United States can better leverage this program to meet both its domestic economic objectives as well as its economic strategic objectives as well. Those changes are to expand the cap to allow more into the program because it's far oversubscribed, to, when you expand the cap, prioritize strategic sectors where we have a either foreign policy, economic security, or national security objective to be achieved, which currently is not being done. And therefore, we're sort of limiting the effect of our industrial policy by not allowing labor to flow in the same way capital flows currently. And then lastly, removing this $100,000 fee, which is very punitive and is going to, in real terms, restrict access to this program and incentivize offshoring of these strategic occupations and industries. So thank you so much, Thibault. Thank you all. We'll see you again soon.